Hello and welcome to the Modcast Podcast, or for short, the Mod Pod. The Mod Pod is here to provide an ongoing, continuous resource for moderators, community managers, academics, and really everyone, actually, in understanding the state of content moderation and community management, one topic at a time. This is, of course, the inaugural episode of the Mod Pod, and for this episode, we'll be diving into why moderation is even important to communities, what it looks like. We'll cover what moderation is, when it's important to engage in, when to perhaps put resources into it, what effect it has, and the two of us, Kairi and myself, will be hosts for this experience, and in fact, I'll let Kairi introduce herself first.
Awesome. Thank you, Sean. My name is Kairi. I've been moderating online for a few years now. Funnily enough, I actually started moderating on a Minecraft server, but slowly and surely I made it my way to other platforms, Discord and Twitch most importantly, and now I work in the tech industry, so I'm super excited to be here with you guys and our guests and you, Sean. Sean, you want to give us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Sean Lee. I've been in the content moderation space for almost a decade now. I also, actually, gaming-wise, I got involved in it because I was running a WoW guild a long time ago. And then from there, actually professionally worked in the content safety space at Dropbox for a while, worked at Reddit for a little bit, and now I actually run trust and safety and policy at Discord. So I have seen a lot of the content moderation space, and it's really exciting to be here at this point in time. We'd also like to take some time, of course, to introduce our guests for this episode. We have Devin Nash with us and Robert Jan, RJ. Kairi, do you want to introduce Devin?
Of course. Thanks, Sean. Devin is the CMO for Nerd Fusion, a talent agency and production company that represents some amazing streamers. Before being CMO, he was the CEO of CLG, or Counter Logic Gaming, and he also has some significant experience in esports. On top of that, he's actually a streamer in his own right, frequently holding court in the intersection of esports, business, and gaming. You can find him at twitch.tv/Devin Nash. Welcome to the Mod Pod, Devin.
Thanks. It's more of a kangaroo court.
Our other guest is Robert Jan Kortums, commonly known as RJ. He has quite the versatile online life. He's been a streamer, a commentator for CSGO, and most importantly, of course, a moderator. His moderation career started out on Twitch over 5 years ago when he was moderating for The Running Man Z, which is, I think, RJ, a DayZ streamer. Yeah, still. And RJ still oversees the Twitch team to this day, and of course, when the streamers really broadly started developing Discord servers, came over to Discord as well. Nowadays, RJ owns a server with around 34,000 members, Kappa, and moderates several communities as well, while also administering the moderation station, which is actually a really interesting Discord server that is focused on Twitch moderation. So a lot of overlap there.
Yep, absolutely delighted to be here, of course. It's quite the experience, I guess, I have behind me that also allows me to really, apply it well. And especially nowadays with the moderation station, I only recently got invited onto the administrator team, and I'm really happy to be able to, oversee a place like that and really share the experience there and have that community for actually Twitch moderators.
Yeah, and actually we'll be talking, I think, a little bit more in depth about sort of Twitch and Discord and actually a number of other platforms as well a little bit later. But I think really just to start out, when we talk about moderation, right, I think one of the sort of biggest misunderstandings of moderation and probably what most people actually think of when they think of, moderation is like, you sit around in maybe a stream, a chat, or maybe a server and you ban people for saying bad words. And I think for a lot of people, they're like, yeah, like, aren't there, doesn't AutoMod do that, right? Like, aren't there bots that do that? And I guess I'm actually kind of curious from both of your perspectives, and Devin, let's start with you. Like, what is your moderation, what is your experience with moderation been in the communities that you've run, in the businesses that you've run? What does it mean for you, and why do you think that moderators are important?
That's a giant question. I mean, look, I think I've become more and more zen about this over the years. I really think that a moderator should do a single thing, and that is they should be the paragon of what you want your community to represent. So what that means is I don't really care in the context of Twitch chat that they have a sword or that they enforce anything. But everything that they type should be what I would want every viewer to ideally type. Does that make sense? The reason is because they uphold a certain community position where it's very subtle, but there is a cultural way that every broadcast flows. And even in streams of 10,000, 15,000 people, there's very different cultures across different streams. And a lot of the way that this is calibrated is by, first of all, what the broadcaster actually acknowledges in chat. But second of all, the way that moderators moderate and control chat through mostly, but a lot of people think it's through timing out or banning or whatnot. But actually, it's mostly through the way that they talk. Because people will, especially in smaller broadcasts, people will always look to that as the cultural expectation. If your moderator is, I don't have a better word for this than cursing, so I won't, but it's whenever a moderator posts multiple times in the same spam posting. I did it. Okay. Whenever a moderator is spam posting or something, like dots down the screen, right? That has a very different implication of the culture of your stream than like a thoughtful or insightful comment. So I only have moderators to establish culture. That's it.
That makes a lot of sense. And actually just sort of diving in a little bit more on that, and maybe this is also a sort of preview of the future, but how did you actually come to select those moderators in the first place?
I have 2 moderators for my Twitch stream. I also believe in like having that's like too many. Like I absolutely as few as possible. Both of them, I've been streaming for 8 years. They are some of the oldest people in the community. And the way that I choose them is there is an entire lines of scrolling Twitch chat very fast. Okay, let's say this is on a day where I have like 2, 3, 4K concurrence. Okay. I tell them, ban the person that I don't like in chat. I don't tell them who it is. And out of 40 or 50 people, they ban the person every time that I don't want to be there. and I know that's a person that understands, but it's a combination of things. It's like, I have a very deep, so I also pay moderators. I have a really deep trust in like the moderators that I utilize. I think that they are personal friends. I've met them both in real life a couple of times. And I guess, you know what, the best way to answer this question, I know they don't take moderation seriously. That like banning people isn't like the highlight of their day and isn't like a like huge thing for them, because I think enforcement is one of the least important parts of being a moderator. And
right.
So I want people with that attitude.
Right. They're not there because they're like, aha, I can like wield a ban hammer and be like, haha, I have, gotten people to be banned or anything. They're there really to be like, hey, everyone that's part of this community, should have a certain standard, and we should all be sort of like, we should all want the same thing, right? We should all contribute to like a better community.
Yeah, they're there to represent what the culture should be. And they're not even, and that's not even saying that they should actually say they're there for that, right? It would be the same as like inviting a bunch of really pretty girls to your party because you want it to be better. Okay.
It's funny because it makes sense.
Yeah, it ups the whole environment and it ups the whole game. And then like all the other stuff, which is like, oh, we gotta like ban this person or whatever, that's all secondary. Like and in the same way, I would only, not to jump too far forward, but I would only ban people that either break some incredible terms of service, which is like abject racism or something, or people who don't fit the vibe and culture of the broadcast and how it's trying to be curated.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I do want to say, by the way, before I start, Devin, massive props for paying moderators. It is something that you don't see that often, but which actually does mean a lot. I think with the amount of hours people sometimes put in, I really want to give you, like just a massive thumbs up for doing that. I think that's a really cool thing of you to do.
Thanks, man. They just donated it back, so.
Yeah, okay, that's fair, but still, it's the thought that counts, right? But yeah, to kind of further go on the question, what moderation means to me, it's quite a varied thing, It's really something that you can look at from a lot of ways. It is indeed not just a case of swinging your ban hammer around and relishing the fact that you can actually remove people from chat, but I think it is very much about making the community just all in all a safe and nice place to be, and also really keeping it that way and to kind of prevent it from going sour in a way. At the same time, I also want to mention that moderation can also really mean connecting with a few people. It's just something that I've really experienced with, for example, Paul, the Running Man's. in that team, like that Twitch team, there's one of those moderators I've actually like stayed at. I've actually seen him IRL when I went to Sweden. I stayed at his place, and like it's a really tight-knit group of people. We've known each other for several years now, and we're there for each other. It becomes kind of a really just important and valuable group of friends as well. And I think that's important to highlight too, because it's also really important that in a good moderation team, you know, that dynamic will be there, and everyone will kind of look out for each other. And you'll also notice that people will check each other. They'll keep each other in check. Like if something happens, they're not afraid to perhaps question each other's actions, which is also something that I find very important in moderation, because you shouldn't be afraid to like call your fellow moderator on something, but you should just do it in a proper way, of course. Don't be like, what the hell did you do, dude? But be constructive and try and tackle the problem well, and kind of, you know, look for progress and make it so that people just become better from it. But yeah, all in all, I'd say, just to give you a bit of a general line, I think it's just really important that moderation is there to keep the community really just pleasant and safe and nice, and to keep the bad actors out.
Yeah, I think, and we'll touch on this a little bit later, but I think one of the things that you brought up that I think is really interesting is that, you know, the idea of there being a community inside of the moderators themselves, right? That it's not just like, oh, yes, we are, I don't know, the sort of nameless, like, whoever people here to, like, enforce rules, but actually that certainly over time, right, that hopefully you actually develop these into friendships, right, and into, like, really getting to know these people. And I think actually, to sort of Devin's example, right, like, getting to the point where they can, I don't know, read your mind or something, right? And you can be like, hey, can you like ban this person? And they're like, yes, I can ban that person. And you don't, right? Like, you don't have to say who it is. You don't have to say anything like that. Like, you've just like established like such a good sort of, I think, link with them that everyone sort of is absolutely on the same page of where the community should go. I think that's really important. So actually, I think on that, right, like maybe to sort of look at the other side of the world, and maybe something a little bit spicier, you know, with the way that the internet is, I think one of the things that we've probably all seen in our separate communities is that a lack of moderation leads to, it is bad news bears, right? It leads to a buildup of toxicity, and that toxicity often leads to sort of, it has obviously long-term effects, I think, more so than just like, oh, like someone is saying something bad and no one is actually moderating that. So I think for either of you, whichever wants to go first, I guess I'm kind of curious, are there communities that you have, and I don't, this isn't to like name or shame, but I think just to sort of like almost study them in a way, right? Like, do you recall communities that you've involved in where you've actually seen that the lack of investment in moderation really led to a negative outcome? And, you know, as part of that, are there times when you've actually, maybe you've joined like someone else's stream and you're just like, oh man, yikes, like this is not a healthy community. I don't want to be here. And how do you feel about sort of situations like that? And are there ways to sort of help them?
Oh man.
Loaded question.
So, this is going to be an ongoing theme for me here, I can already tell. I think that there are two separate things between moderation and culture.
Mm-hmm.
Moderation is a very small aspect of what a moderator should do. You couldn't even call, so I don't even call my moderators. I call them community leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that lack of moderation leads to a bad community. I'll give you a perfect example. Like 39 Daff, she's the only moderator in her chat. She has 6K concurrence on average, but it's a fantastic community. Almost never anybody posts anything toxic, almost anything that ever needs to be deleted. And the reason is because it's how the broadcaster sets the expectation of the community, that what's okay and what isn't okay is something that's reflected with the broadcaster and how they control the community. And if there are plenty of communities that have very low moderation input, and they're perfectly fine. There are also a lot of communities that are over moderated, and it's worse than if they didn't have any moderators at all. There are lots of people that you can go into a 20 viewer stream. They've moderated like 3 or 4 of their friends. A new viewer comes in, it's like, hey guys, they get literally like the D&D spell Wall of Swords. And they just immediately, it's like they're just immediately pushed out of that community. And I think that is actually way more common than people think at like 100%. So I think, like, when I think about this question, I'm like, okay, who has actually created a community where the culture is to behave in these toxic ways? And there was nobody there that was like a guiding point or a light or a leader to help that along. Instead, it's like like broken window theory, right? Like you break a window, don't fix it, and then
Everyone joins, looks at it, and it's like, oh,
people spray paint
Yep.
and then like eventually somebody dies on that alleyway because like they just didn't fix a window. It's a cause and effect lead in, and it's like you have to fix those windows right away, and then you don't get your community to that point.
So ultimately, I think that makes a lot of sense. Ultimately, what it kind of sounds like, right, is that certainly, especially for beginner streamers, right, they are, for a streamer that has maybe 20 viewers, like maybe they are the only streamer there. I guess, is your expectation for them, certainly I think the expectation for them is that they set the culture, but I guess my question actually to you is like, they're obviously also busy creating the content and doing this stuff. How do you sort of find a balance between making sure that you are, I guess, paying attention to chat and making sure that you're sort of setting that like positive culture and the culture that you want it to be while still, ostensibly trying to focus on, I don't know, shooting some people in Valorant or something?
So it sounds difficult, but the real answer to this question, and the thing that almost nobody does, is you have a plan going in, which means that like you understand what your culture is. Literally, you like open up a notepad, which is a thing that I do a lot, and you say, what do I want my culture to be? If I could populate my chat full of these types of people, what kind of people would those be? For me, it's people that actually have a brain, and also can read the room. Like they're able to joke a bit, but they're not able to joke in that super weird way. And that's it. Like that's the two requirements for being here. Like have a brain, think about things, like critically think, and and even if you're sorry if I pause, it's because I would normally curse, and so I'm not okay. So like have a brain, and then also be respectful in the sense like and read the room, but that's not like really a useful answer. So like have a plan actually before you go, and it's like something that sounds like technically difficult, but it's like if you can't handle how to create a culture, and as a broadcaster, you already have way bigger problems and moderators that are not going to fix for you. So you have to actually take a step back and focus on the building blocks of what makes your content good. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, I think it does. I do have another question. Do you think that this sort of like moderating your own community is easier to do on Twitch versus like other communities like Reddit or Discord, where it might get overwhelming for you to try to moderate it all for yourself? Or what are your thoughts on that?
No, it's the same. The number of people. So I have a 20,000 person Discord server. The number of people that we've had to actually ban on it for any like thing that Discord would consider to be like an actual terms of service violation is less than 3. And again, that is because, and this Discord server is like really, like a lot of people say I run a Discord server that has 20,000 people. Anybody could, not anybody, but you know what I mean? It really is. It really is that
very good Discord servers that are very big. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah. It really is that. And then on Twitch, I always tell people, since a lot of times I'm in a position inadvertently to talk to a lot of smaller broadcasters, I guess they think that they always say to me like, okay, like how many moderators I should have? I say you should get your first mod at 400 concurrent viewers, 500 maybe. And right now, averaging about 1,500 to 2,000, I have 2 moderators, and that's too many.
Interesting.
Ooh.
Yes,
I guess
RJ?
because I'm actually holding a notepad and writing a few things down, because also I have the memory of a goldfish as well, so that helps. Like to get back way to the earlier point, but which does kind of tie around. I think the community that you have, it's absolutely true. The way you set the room and the tone as a streamer will make a massive difference. If you allow toxicity to enter your chat, then and if you allow sort of a toxic atmosphere to form, it'll be a lot faster that you're going to run into situations where people in chat are also just being overly toxic and just not being pleasant whatsoever. But I don't know. I think I also totally agree that you shouldn't have too many moderators. There's nothing as frightening as going into a chat and just seeing, like you said, a wall of swords, a green, 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 and nothing else. Absolutely agree that is just one of those things that you see sometimes, and it's always just kind of, it's not frightening, but it just makes you think like, well, am I going to butt in here? Do I really fit into this atmosphere? So that's definitely a solid point. But I think, like, personally, you can sometimes, even if you are the most wholesome person ever, you can never like fully prevent bad actors showing up in your community. That someone just might just be browsing, might just be in a bad mood, or might just decide I'm gonna troll a streamer today, and we'll just hop in and start saying toxic things. I gotta admit, with like the communities that I've mainly moderated, Daisy, you run into a particular kind of person that tends to hop in and start really ripping on the game, and really like to a point of, okay, we get it, you don't like the game, you know, fine, that's okay. You can say that you don't like it, but there is a limit, you know? People just tend to take it a bit too far sometimes. And I feel like that, for example, because what you say as well with your first moderator at 400 concurrent viewers, I can't imagine that, because I've had streams where I've moderated streams with only 50 or 100 viewers where there have already been like several trolls in chat, where even if you had just one moderator, it would have been a lot more difficult to get a grip on it. You can get a grip on it, but it's delayed.
The vast majority of broadcasters are advocating it and are incentivizing that behavior. So, for example, if you respond to negativity, then that reinforces that there should be more negativity, because that attention is the redeeming factor that person is looking for. And in the same way, I give subs to people that say something really cool in chat. Doesn't have to be nice or whatever, just very insightful or very funny or very good. I gift a sub directly to that person, and I talk directly to that person. And if you want like the best example of this, okay, look at a broadcaster called Moonmoon. Moonmoon has 12 to 15,000 concurrent viewers every day, barely any moderation, almost none. I think he has like a few moderators, and I've had him on my show, and we talked a bunch about this exact subject. In fact, we had like a whole hour on moderation on, and like almost never do they have to ban something. Like again, the amount of, I have personally, and I consume a lot of like an unhealthy amount of Moon content. Like I have never ever seen somebody like blatantly break terms of service, because like, and this has to do with like we're talking about behavioral psychology here, right? Because what humans are a gregarious species, and what they will do in groups is they will behave to the expectation that is set for them to behave within the tribe. So for what we think is like, well, there are these like there are very few people I have found out in the world that just want to watch the world burn, and they're just going to come in and they'll be like, yeah, N-word, and there it is, and it's like oh my god, like there are those people, like there's some 13-year-old out there that's like super edgy, but moderators like pretend that this is like a thing where like you would have them like holding a golden sword and they're like fighting the bastion of like the tide of like of chaos, and they're like they're barely holding. It's not that. It's like it's so rare that somebody actually comes along with that. But if you incentivize that behavior, you could get an entire chat of 400 people doing it, and it's such a delicate line to walk, because we as human beings tend to accentuate the negativity in our minds. So we can read 100 positive comments, and if our mind will single out that one negative one, and we'll be like, that's it. But you have to, as a broadcaster, one of your most important things is it's really a constant practice. And I watch myself when I do it, and other broadcasters when they do it. But focusing in on that negativity brings more of it, and then you have a situation where you're going to be in an arms race. But what I'm saying, and you do need like 5-10 moderators in a 400-person chat. But what I'm saying is that that's a failure of the broadcaster initially, and then perpetually going forward.
Yeah, I think just actually on that, like, I think that makes a lot of sense, especially for broadcasters that are starting out. And, you know, I think it's great for them to keep that in mind. I guess I'm actually kind of curious if you think that, like, let's say that you have gotten to maybe the 10,000 viewer mark, or maybe even more than that, right? Like, there are certainly some notable streamers out there that are, you know, regularly 50,000 viewers or stuff like that. And I think, I don't know of, I think to your point, I know of a couple of the like 5 to 10,000 viewer marks that like regular sort of active viewer marks where the chat is frankly pleasant and it is like shocking and surprising. I know, but it feels like it kind of breaks down somewhere above that. Do you think that is just a factor that, like, you know, these streamers haven't quite gotten to that level of size yet? Or do you think that at some level it's like, if you are consistently only ever on the front page of Twitch, then you're just going to get more sort of trolls and bad people?
So a couple things on that. So one is that the largest average viewership on Twitch quite often is Asmongold. Asmongold has a very reasonable community. He almost never needs to moderate, and he has 50,000 to 60,000 concurrents. He says himself that he basically self-moderates his chat. It's pretty rare that that moderators need to do a ton there. And it's just the way that he holds his community. I think like Quinn69 and other ones like where that's a really good example, like where moderators have more of the role of what I'm talking about, which is like community leading, where they are actually like they're adding stuff to his stream. They can add GIFs, they can add sound effects. They can change his face so that like he's wearing a clown hat. Like it's like an amazing like way to integrate. So another like broadcaster, I'm sure everyone on this call knows, is Co Carnage, who does this. Where like and it's like that's what I'm saying is like if you have your moderators contributing to the actual production quality and the actual like broadcast, there's a lot more value than just like the enforcement. But I don't necessarily accept that like communities get worse as they get bigger. I think that is a product of the culture and expectations that broadcasters set, and we just so often see that. The other thing to consider too is that now if we're talking about 5,000 concurrent viewers, that's the top 0.00001%. And it's actually safe to say that every one of those broadcasters past 5,000 concurrent viewers has a unique situation per stream because there are so few of them. There's so few of them on Twitch that at that point we can actually single out every broadcaster and say, okay, what is their individual situation? Because we're literally talking about 200 people.
I think that very quickly starts to fall in a community anyhow, that every community, when it develops, it starts to develop its own in-jokes and its own habits and its own, things that they regularly do and stuff that gets said and all that. I think that starts at an early point, but like you say, it does, bring the point home that every community is unique, and even more so the bigger they get.
Yeah, more so on that, do you see like a big difference between like the communities that are focused on the creator themselves versus like on Discord, this is like something you see more often where it's focused on like a game or like a certain community or whatever. Do you think that it's easier or more difficult to moderate those communities? Like what's the difference that you see between those?
It's way more difficult to moderate like a product or a service by a huge amount. Yeah, because like you don't have that guiding beacon to dictate the culture, and you have like a lot more inputs, like people that don't like the game or don't like the particular product or service or something. And particularly in gaming culture, you get this like these certain like I don't like thing people who just sort of wander around the internet just telling everybody, and it's like that's I think a lot more hard to manage. Like I wouldn't want to be like a community leader on like a Blizzard forum has a very tough job. Right, and that's like a totally different type of moderator than a Twitch moderator, like by such a vast margin. It's night and day. They're two different jobs. Yeah, it's like it's two different jobs completely, and two different total discussions. Like that's a place where like everything that I'm saying right now applies to like the universe of live broadcasting and show creation and content creation in real time. And if you go to like the forum world or like Reddit or things like that, we enter like the dark dimension. Like we're in like a totally different it's like a totally different place. It's still set by culture, but the problem you have there is like you don't have these sort of leaders at the forefront, and they're not defined. There's nobody. Sometimes, like really rarely, there is like sometimes like games have like particular leaders who set the pace. Like this is particular in like small games like Stardew Valley, where they have like a very small development team and stuff like that. But man, if you want to moderate like Diablo 3, like nah, it's gonna be a mess no matter what you do.
I've really seen this difference a lot as well in moderating the different communities, and it is absolutely what you say. When it's a community just dedicated to one particular streamer, it's also just I have the feeling that, and this is also something you said earlier, for a game, for example, you're gonna have a way higher influx of people coming in there that are actually not in there with positive intentions. They just want to rant about the game, or they want to like go ham on it, for just figuratively speaking. But with streamers, it's more like, well, they're putting in the extra mile to join the server, so they're probably going to like the streamer anyway. And even if they join and they don't like the streamer, it'll be pretty quickly like put out there. And I've just noticed this really in moderating the different communities. The only thing that I've really ran into, and this is with moderating for Shocks, is that you have certain users that do like the streamer a bit too much, and that is also something you have to pay attention to.
There's a particular thing with the other thing is that moderation in community. I think a lot about this subject. I talk about this all the time. Have a lot of YouTube videos about this. moderation in communities with a female broadcaster is very different
Yeah.
than moderation in communities with male broadcasters. I wish this was not the case
Mhm.
because
but it
typically
is.
there's a lot more negativity in female broadcaster chats, in all forms. And it's this is actually a really big misconception that I think like any time I have a platform I try to talk about it. It's like um it is like categorically more difficult to um be a female broadcaster by every metric on this platform than it is and to be male. And it's like everybody thinks it's the opposite. They think it's like easy growth, easy
Right.
donations. It's
Right.
totally not true. And on top of that, okay, so there was a study that was done that took the top 50 words of every Twitch chat, um, females in the top 2,500 and males in the top 2,500, and then it took the most used words in their chat.
Hmm.
So I could tell you I could say on this podcast almost every single word in the top 50 for males is Frank or Z at the time of the study,
Right.
Pog,
Yeah.
Kappa, and then pretty much 75% of the words, we'd have to end recording on the female one. Just that difference right there,
Wow.
right?
Yeah, to
Yeah.
be honest, this is one thing that I've really noticed with when it comes to casting. A colleague of mine, a female CS:GO caster, she actually made a Twitter post about this, and she had this this was at the times when there were a lot of stories coming out about sexual harassment and assault in esports, and she actually made a post about how you just had she had a compilation basically, just all these screen snippets of people saying god awful things to her while she was on broadcast, and I told her this as well, and I spoke to her about this. Like, yeah, no, it's you have so much worse to endure. Like, the worst thing I've had is that someone said they don't like my voice, or they wanted to marry me. But yeah, but it's like you can barely compare it. It's a serious. Females there have a lot more stuff to deal with. Absolutely.
The really encouraging thing is to look. I really like it when I see a female broadcaster that doesn't have this problem, because it gives me a little bit of hope for the gaming industry. And there's a couple of broadcasters that like their chats are widely gone from this. Like one of them is 39 Deaf. I brought her up before.
Mhm.
Almost, and she has a very intelligent and like way of dealing with it. Is like she will get those weird comments here and there, and the way that she'll respond is she'll make it almost like a disappointed mother.
Mm.
Like, hey, this is like really awkward and just not like what we do here. And then
Right.
like you'd be surprised, they'd be like, oh, like it's like that Family Guy skit where like he stabs that person in the prison. He's like, wait, this is what I've been doing all this time, like this, because he accidentally stabs himself, right? Like he's like, oh my god, I do belong in here, right? Like it's like you just like you put that, and then another person like that is Hot Chubby, where it's like her community very rarely it's just spamming Pepe frogs and emotes. It's like very rarely
Right.
like, yeah, and again, so that's the culture, right? So even in this situation where like the odds are stacked against you, like the culture matters. Like the
Absolutely.
culture matters so much because it can even fix this problem if you're very diligent.
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly like those differences they're really just like profound and huge differences, and I think probably more a commentary actually on sort of the sort of gaming culture and everything as a whole. I think it is interesting though, right, that as a male streamer, the engagement is just going to be a different way than as a female streamer, and I think also similarly, right, like if you're creating a community around an interest, the engagement is different, and it feels like part of that, right, certainly comes from this idea of almost of like, I guess, entitlement per se, right? Where it's like if you are watching a streamer, you're sort of like, hey, I either like the streamer or maybe I don't like the streamer, and the I think the correct rational response is to be like, cool, I'm gonna stop watching the streamer now, right? I think for a lot of sort of for games, for interest, for sort of art, it feels like the response that most people have, instead of saying, oh, I'm going to disengage with this because I don't like it, they're like, actually, I like it, but you're just doing it wrong, and so I am doing you a service by telling you the 1,000 ways that, to your point, Devin, that like Diablo is bad or something like that, right? And instead of, I think with a personality, they're like, oh, this is a person, and if I don't find the person personally appealing, then I think I will just go watch someone else, right? For games and interest, I think as a whole, it feels like weirdly enough the reaction has been much more of a, no, I still own this, and I have a right to sort of effectively like spew abuse, perhaps at the community, perhaps at the community managers, whoever the case may be, for as long as, I guess, until I get banned. And I think that is this like weird dynamic that has arisen that I feel like is also reasonably I guess new, right? Because it feels like, I don't know, and I don't know, maybe, but it feels like in the 70s or 80s when people were like, oh, I don't like movies or I don't like music, they were like, well, I don't like that thing, I'm gonna move on with my life. And now it's like, you have these hordes of, almost like, I guess for lack of a better way of describing them, it almost feels like anti-fans, right? Where they will come in, make themselves a part of the community or attempt to, and then be like, I'm actually just here to, frankly, take a dump on everything that you ever do, unless it is exactly in sort of like the way that I want it. And you just don't see that interaction, I feel, generally with people, right? And I wonder if part of it is just like with streamers, they're like, this is actually a person, right? Some person is putting themselves out there, 12 hours or whatever, right? Like 40 hours a week, like trying to, putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this. And with a game, because it's more like, oh, there are thousands of people that worked on this, or even I think in small indie games, right? There are like 10 people that worked on this, but I don't know any of them specifically. You get much more of a sort of a negative and very vocally sort of negative thing that I think doesn't consider the human.
That is something I've seen a lot as well. When I started out with moderating DayZ, I will admit that there might have been some mistakes there along the development, but I very much echo the sentiment of, oh, you don't like this thing? Just let it go, I mean, nowadays you can also refund something on Steam. Like, there are options to just get it out of your life and just don't care about it anymore. But it really is that entitlement of, for some reason, I have a right to really start ripping on this and really just be super vocal about it. But it's more of that negativity and more of that toxicity that, most people aren't really waiting for. And it's just, I just always question it, like, but what's the point? What are you gaining from just being so vocal about this? And like, what's the point? And I do mean it then in something like the Twitch chat, for example. Like, if you leave a negative review, fair enough. That's a review, that's commentary. But like in a Twitch chat, when people really aren't waiting to hear it, it's always baffled me. It's just uncalled for almost, I guess. And I do mean when they take it too far. You can say that you don't like something, that's one thing, but usually these are cases where people just keep ripping on it even after they've been told, like, okay, we get it, you don't like it, but no one's forcing you to watch, no one's forcing you to stay here.
I think to Talon's point, is kind of like that facelessness that you have, like anonymity on the internet for both yourself and like not having like a forefront for your community. Like Devin said, like if you're on a forum or whatever, there's not typically a community leader that's there like representing the community. And so you just feel like, oh, I'm yelling at the game, I'm not yelling at a person. It just makes you feel more comfortable, and you're like, I'm going to rant and rave into the void, and you're not really considering the user on the other side who has to read this crap and moderate it and deal with it.
Devin, I'm actually kind of curious from a marketing perspective, right? When I think of sort of, the responsibilities of maybe a community manager who it is in fact their job, right, to sort of control the message, or not control, right, but to sort of like try and make the feedback, if not positive, at least useful. But also like from a Twitch streamer's perspective, like I think if I am streaming and I'm like, oh, this person doesn't like me and keeps on, dumping on me, like there's some part of it where it's like, well, maybe you should go watch something else and like, please stop. And if you don't stop, I'm going to ban you. I feel like in some marketing sense, like if you are running a platform and you're like, hey, I'm taking feedback for a famous game or for whatever, right? Or even you're just like running a community that's not officially associated with it, but you want your community to be good. I feel like your responses are pretty similar, right? But it feels like in a lot of ways, those community managers are like, no, actually, I feel like I need to take the negative feedback, or like, it's right for me to take the negative feedback, even when the negative feedback I think goes too far. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so the reason why people are generally more negative towards like products and services is because it's easier to create an identity around doing that. So this is all this is an identity problem. Even in broadcaster circles with live broadcasting that has a lot of negativity, it's an identity problem. What you do is you inhabit a role that says, okay, the expectations for my behavior here are going to be that I'm going to be negative. That's what's being reinforced. Because that's the kind of attention that I get. So, for example, if you are on a forum and you have a person has learned through the use of being super over articulate and full sentences and constantly pointing out the minutia when a game developer gets something wrong or does a bug, they have learned that they're going to get very successful response from that. So there's going to be like a ton of people fighting each other, and it's literally the kid that throws the first thing in a food fight, and now everybody, and then he just sits back and watches it, right? Like we're reinforcing that negative behavior. And so it becomes a aspect of the personal identity of that individual to do so and to continue doing that. That is what they've learned, and they will just go to every community doing this. And this is not like a even like a malicious or like actively conscious thing. It's a set of sort of behaviors that's been reinforced in that person, and that has beget them to be this like negative person.
The positive feedback that they've gotten is do this and you will be
100%,
rewarded for
yep.
it. And they're like,
And
that sounds great.
That is why, right? I've had a very long history with haters going all the way back into esports, where like we would lose games and we would get people that would like personally email us and like do everything possible to tell us like, I mean, just like, just direct targeted harassment. And what I learned from it was every single time, occasionally, I'd have the opportunity to go check out a little bit about that person. They left a Twitter comment so I could check out their profile. There's something back to their LinkedIn or whatever, or like, something like that. Nothing like crazy, just like, oh, like, they're using the same username or something. So I'll just go check them out. Every single time I've done that without exception, that person has been in a terrible circumstance in their life. And they're like that on every other forum that they're on. It's a blanket thing. So I think that the lesson there is that there are just people that have been, and behavioral psychology can teach us this, right? Like there are people that have been introduced into communities, led through a certain group of expectations that they have learned that the attention that they're going to get from something is going to be, if they're negative, is going to be positively reinforced. And so this is the kind of like that personal identification of the kind of caliber that people have to contend with on these like you're saying on these like forums. But the way that you prevent that is you need to sort of trigger in their subconscious, this community doesn't really give me what I want, and then they leave. And that's the mastery. That's what you got to do. Because if you just keep, most moderation is reactive. It's somebody posts a very look at like Western medicine versus Eastern medicine. Okay, they both have uses, right? Like Western medicine is very, what's your symptoms? What do you got? Okay, you probably have this problem. Let's fix it. Eastern medicine is, let's make sure that you don't get this problem.
Right.
So so in the same way, you need to apply that to moderation. But almost all moderation is Western medicine. It's person posts negative comment, let's ban them. And maybe let's make a show of banning them and tell everybody why we ban them, which literally right, and everyone on this call can follow. What does that do? It says, oh, well, I got all that attention, right? But very little of it is preventative. Very little of it is, okay, here's how we set our culture and expectations so that this kind of thing doesn't live here. This kind of bacteria doesn't grow on this surface.
I do think certain streamers, I think they almost have an issue with it, with like just the kind of ignoring the negativity, because I think that's kind of the gist of it. That you have to really you have to get it over with, but you don't give them any more attention than they need. Literally just ban them, and you don't really speak of it. You just let it go so that they don't get that validation of, oh, I just did a bad thing, but now the stream is talking about me, and now chat's talking about me, and ooh, all these, like those reactions that they really get a kick out of. And yeah, that's one of the things that you really want to go against.
Exactly, because it's a personal identification thing for broadcasters too. See, here's the thing, man. Broadcasters, they love to like take themselves out of this. They'll be like, oh God, I'm always so moderated and harassed against. It's like, it's true. Yeah, like we got to deal with a lot of stuff being online broadcasters 100%, but like you got to take ownership of it as well. And it's like, that's the thing, right? Is like there might, like that little smirk that you get because your whole chat is attacking a person and they're all weird championing them, and they're all like, hey, this is not like they're like, hey, this is like, and maybe they're even like attacking him, right? For you to step in, because it's a personal identity thing for you too, for you to drop that ego and to step in and be like, yo guys, just don't pay attention to it, man. Just move on. Let's go. Let's talk about stuff that's more important. That is a power move. But if you get stuck in your ego and you just let your chat do that, Well, now all of a sudden you've reinforced that negative behavior because they're like, I got everybody mad. I got 10 people to respond to me. I can do that again.
And
But
then every lurker that is watching is
yes,
like, wow,
Yeah.
this is
exactly it.
exactly what I need to do to be noticed.
Yes,
But it's
exactly. And so many broadcasters, I have lots of friends, obviously we're not going to name them and stuff, but like they're always telling me, they're like, and these are people that are, really, really high up in the concurrence. They're always telling me, they're like, man, like my whole chat is negative. I hate it. And it's like, dude, you're on your broadcast, you're only responding to people that are negative.
Mhm.
Right. Like,
But it-
and so that's exactly what you said, Talon. Every person in the chat gets that education. Like they never said anything before. They're, oh, that's how I did. If I send a message to the streamer that's like, hey man, just wanted to let you know that like your content is really cool and like made a big difference to me, they'll ignore that. In a fast moving chat, they'll be like, ah, yes, whatever. Right. But the one guy that actually like says the thing that gets under the skin, like and probably knows their insecurity because they've heard them talk about it before.
Yep.
That aggravates. That is why I said something earlier that I want to accentuate. I gift subs to people that are positive because
Right.
that is, and I don't gift them because I'm trying to create that one fan. I'm doing it because I am trying to show the culture of what we expect to the lurkers. 100%.
Mhm.
I have also noticed that the herd mentality is a very strong thing in that one, and that it comes back to what you said earlier about the streamer having to kind of, put his ego aside. But I think it's also, especially because it's also like a snowball effect, when the chat really gets onto someone, you have to either be really heavy-handed as a moderator, then more in the situation that I'm thinking of, where I've seen it with Paul, for example, the Running Man's, where like someone said something and like the entirety of chat is just going on this guy and they keep going, and you just basically have to say like, okay, if just any more about this subject, because you want people to move on and you want the negativity to stop, you just have to be like, okay, we're going to just start purging like anything about it now, because we want to drop this subject and we want to move on, and we want to get back into that positive mental space. And it's such a shame. Yeah, it's such a shame when people get stuck in that negativity.
Yeah, you just have to be really careful about how you present that to the community. So like a lot of people, they're so serious. They'll be like, like I've been in all kinds of different communities, and this is why I'm saying, and I'm glad that like we're kicking it off with this, because the future episodes I know will not have this take. But over moderation is one of the biggest problems that
Mm.
is in creating good communities. 100% on Twitch it is.
Right.
It not like over moderated forums and over moderated like Reddits and stuff, they actually like are a lot less heavy handed. They can be, just because of the way that the communication works. But on Twitch, 100%, like over moderated communities are actually one of the biggest things that hold small broadcasters back from being bigger.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting actually, because one of the, I think, themes that really has been going on this entire episode is actually just like, frankly, the really like the base level understanding of like sociology and psychology and how that plays in, right? And yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting because it's not like, when you first streaming on Twitch that like, Twitch gives you a handbook and is like, hey, in case you've never heard of concepts like herd mentality or broken window theory, or ways that people respond to attention, like maybe think about them. But clearly, right, like I think that, to your point, like certainly every person who has been streaming for a while, I think if nothing else, like even if you've never academically heard of these concepts, you literally see them in practice, right? You're just like, oh, this thing happened, and every time this thing happens, this other thing happens. Like maybe, right? Like do you think that there's, I don't know if space is the right word, but do you think it would be beneficial if, I guess, more streamers actually like started with a like, hey, when you are running a community, when you have people that are interacting with each other, when these people are mostly anonymous, here are the like, you should do these things, you should not do these things, and this is why. Because literally these like, these situations are not like, yeah, the internet is new, but like frankly, these psychological situations are not new situations, right? Like we've been studying them for hundreds of years. Do you feel like there's a lack of understanding there among most streamers?
So do's and don'ts are always going to be subjective, and they're not going to apply to everyone. A better thing to do is the number one like takeaway here, the number one lesson is, what do you do if you want to start a business? What do you do if you want to start something new? What do you do if you want to learn a new skill? You have a plan, right? You sit back and you say, what do I want this to look like? What is my vision of this thing? Most people, they just hit the start broadcasting section. They figure out their webcam. They sit in the corner, and then they play some games, and then they allow to figure it out. But every single, and I'm one of the things that I do on my show is I interview successful broadcasters, content creators, people, Olympic medalists, all kinds of crazy stuff. And I've probably interviewed, I'd say, over 50 of the top creators on Twitch, and every single one of them has a good understanding and a good vision of exactly how their community should look. And they planned it. They thought it out. They sit back at one point and they said, okay, this is how I want this to look. And this is how this, and literally like, it's like almost like a visualization exercise. Like, what kind of chat do I want my chat to be? And what you're going to hear a lot in the conversation around moderation is like, oh yeah, and then there's this guy that comes in and he does these things, that kind of person that comes in and says these kind of things about games. Stop doing that. Like that's a waste of time. What you need to do is you need to take personal ownership of your channel and say, what do I want this to be? And then every behavior that you encourage should be to that end from that point on.
I think that makes the difference though as well, because you say these top streamers. I think they are top streamers as well because of the fact that is one of the key things that they did. They put in the effort to make a long-term plan. I had this discussion with a mate of mine a while ago, how he also it was kind of this discussion also going more into the psychology side of things, where if you don't really have this long-term plan or you don't have this goal that you're striving for, then you're also it's going to be way easier for you to just kind of straddle along and go with the flow, but not really have any ambition or any plan or anywhere to get. And I think there's a lot of people that just, with streaming as well, that do indeed just hit the start streaming button and they are just kind of like, well, this is fun, but they don't have the ambition perhaps to actually become one of the top, X streamers. And I think that's, part of the problem as well. And obviously moderation is an essential part of that as well. And, to kind of circle it back to that discussion point, I think that is also something that you should think about and actually account for to, in part, I guess, make your, your Twitch stream or whatever it might be that you have, your Discord server, etc., to actually make it successful.
Yeah, you're mentioning these top streamers have this success because they make these plans, but I would say that it is the same thing in any community. Like when you're creating your Discord server, a lot of people will just like copy paste rules that they see in another server, but the rules in successful Discord servers don't work in every Discord server. You have to be very specific about what you want in your community. On Reddit as well, like when you're setting out your guidelines of what your posts want to look like, you have to, say this is what we want this forum to look like. And I think that you're very, very correct on that you have to set those guidelines out. You have to have a plan of what you want it to look like, and you have to, enforce it with your own behaviors.
It's 100% right. Yeah. I have an exact vision of what I want my Discord server to look like and what the kind of people I want to be chatting. It's written down. And I have that too for the broadcast. And that's exactly right. It's like, even if you're a game developer, you should have that. But the number one thing that you said at the end is reinforce that with your behavior. Any leaders of that community behave in such a way that advocates the vision that they have for that server or that thing or that game or that community.
Yeah, I think that's 100%. Like, we actually get this question at Discord every once in a while, which is like, oh, do you have do you have a set of rules that we can use, right? Do you have sort of the like best practices and stuff like that? And it's like, we have some form of best practices, sure, but like fundamentally, right, like Discord servers do not look like other Discord servers, right? Like a Discord server around Minecraft is obviously going to be very different from a Discord server around a popular streamer, right? And like, it doesn't make sense to be like, oh yes, here's sort of your cookie cutter rules that every Discord server follows, because fundamentally at the end of the day, right, like the server, like any community, right, like should have its own identity, and especially certainly communities around streamers and around content creators, right, like should be a reflection of either that content creator or what that content creator wants that community to be. And I think that there's just, we get this question a lot, I suspect, because a lot of people are like, oh, this person is successful, how can I be like them? Like, can I just copy the rules? And it's like, no. They were not successful because of the rules that they put on their server, right? They were successful because, I think to all of your points, right, like that they had a plan for exactly the type of person they wanted to be, the type of content that they wanted to produce, and the sort of like area that they wanted to own in the world.
Yeah. No, I think it really gets to the point of it, of just having that long-term vision and really an idea of where you want to go. It is so much more efficient and so much more practical than to just, go along with it and kind of see where you will arrive, because you have to have a place in your mind where you actually want to arrive. If you step into your car, you know where you're going to go. Just to give an example, if you step into your car and you're just going to drive, well, okay, sure, but where are you going to go? What's your end goal? What's your target?
Yeah, so I think we could have this conversation for a really long time, but something we do want to do before we wrap our episode up is mention some Q&A questions. So in our Discord server, we solicit our community for a couple of questions that we want to ask to the hosts and the guests. And so we got a couple for this, obviously being the first episode. We don't have a ton of stuff going, but I want to hit on some of these that we got. And so this question, I think that we answered pretty well, but there's something at the end of the question. So this person asked, ultimately, what are the goals and objectives of moderation? I think we hit on that pretty well already. If you're starting out, and even if you've had a community for years, what do you do to tell your moderators how they're doing a good job? So I think that's the end part of the question is something that maybe we can answer. How do you let your community leaders or your moderators, whatever you want to call them, how do you let them know that they're doing a good job, or even how they're doing a poor job? And if you want to address that.
I literally let them know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really dumb, but in leadership, it's like actually having an emotional moment, especially as a broadcaster or a person that gets duly or unduly elevated to a perceived position of more social prowess. If you go, I have a mod chat in my Discord, which is just the people that it's very standard, right? Everybody has that. But I will literally, I can probably scroll up in there and just say, hey dudes, just want to say, I feel like everything's been going really well. Really, really appreciate you. And I'll make sure to do that like once every month or so, Mm-hmm. And I will always like treat them with that kind of preferential respect. Like a lot of times, if you just want to let people know they're doing a good job, just tell them they are. It's pretty straightforward. Yeah.
I think that even goes for life in general. To be honest, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with a bit of positivity in our lives. But I think especially new moderators as well. How I've personally handled that is also kind of just giving them a few like heads up, just a couple of pointers of like, oh yeah, keep this and this and this in mind, to kind of make it a bit less of an overwhelming thing. Oh, you're a new moderator. Okay, you've got the badge, but you get added onto the Discord, and the Discord has like several channels and for moderators, and where do I do this? And I've banned someone. If it happens, where do I have to log it, etc. All those things. So just for really focusing on the starting out thing. Give them a few pointers, and also let there be an atmosphere of you can ask questions. There is nothing wrong with just asking and asking for help, because we're all in this together, so to speak, and we're all ready to help. In regards to them doing a good job or a bad one, I think that is very much reflected by just the community itself. Like if I'm thinking about Twitch chat, you'll just see in Twitch chat if something that a moderator does causes either a positive vibe or a good thing or a negative thing, your community will respond to that, and you'll very quickly be made aware of it. And then it is something that you have to tackle. Of course, if it's positive, you just give them positive feedback. Say like, hey, you did an awesome job there, or super smart idea to make that a command, or something like that. But if they did something negative, don't be afraid to just tell them. But also, don't be a bit of an arse about it. Just say it honestly, and just be honest, but also be constructive. Like, hey, okay, see, so you did this thing wrong, but this is how you can prevent it from going wrong in the future. And it's really, it's not the end of the world. It happens, etc. You only really have to start worrying if things are consistently going wrong time after time.
Yeah, I think that actually leads into the next question in a lot of ways, which sort of more deals with, I think, almost like conflicts between server owners or content creators and their moderators, right? And I think actually to a point that we were talking about earlier, I think if you come in with a plan, this probably is less likely to happen. But I think we probably all know of content creators that, started their sort of streaming careers doing something, and then time has gone by, maybe, because they saw a change in the traffic, maybe because their just like personal circumstances changed, their brand has changed slightly, right? And so maybe they were, for example, more family friendly at first, and then they became slightly less family friendly. If you're a moderator in one of these communities, if you're a community leader, if you work for this streamer and you notice that that the stream itself is changing, and that not only is the stream itself changing, but that the streamer, right, that the content creator seems completely okay with it, or even actually maybe delights in it, and has started to do some of these negative behaviors. I mean, I think maybe there's an obvious answer of like, oh, maybe it's time to stop moderating for that streamer. But I guess sort of more broadly, how does that, like, how do you feel like that interaction works? Because I think frequently there's sort of a power dynamic there, right? Like, I think a lot of moderators don't feel like they're like, oh yes, I'm gonna call you out for something that I don't think you should do. Like, how do you deal with a situation like that?
Okay, so there's a huge thing here. Okay, I call this the tough decision. So what this is, I'll speak from the broadcaster perspective and the moderator perspective. So from the broadcaster perspective, there are a few people in your community right now that you should ban. They haven't actually officially knocked down like any TOS stuff, but the vibe is wrong. And because you leave them there, your entire chat suffers and your entire community suffers. Everybody knows who those people are. Ban them, 100%. If they're on your moderator team, ban them also. Because what happens very often, especially in communities with female broadcasters and influencers that I've helped, female influencers that I've helped, a lot of the time, they'll get these moderators who ostensibly are coming in to be very positive, very helpful, and then it gets weird. And because they don't want to confront that person, make that person feel bad or whatnot, they don't remove them. That power dynamic you're talking about that starts to exist in Discords and starts to exist in communities, the moderators like get a feel of their own. And it almost, in a lot of communities, that actually, it's going to sound crazy, but in a lot of communities, it's an us versus them, like them against the broadcaster thing.
Yep.
And see, you guys intuitively understand it, right? You're like, yeah, that's like you've heard, you're like, yeah, because that's it's actually there. And what that is the fault of the broadcaster not confronting those people in the first place when it was little, and they could have probably prevented it. They let that dragon grow until it owns a cave and is eating people. And the only answer there is you've got to come in and just be like, all right. And like, I have actually blasted out entire groups of people because the vibe was wrong. I was like, we're redoing this from the ground up. And like, and like, it seems like it's draconian, but I understand in my head so intimately what that vibe should look like. And from the moderator perspective, I think it's similar but different in the sense that if you're just like showing up every day and you're just like, man, this sucks. Like, you know, I don't really like this person anymore. Like, you got to take ownership too and be like, I'm out, because that like, this is moderation for the vast majority of people is volunteer. If you're getting paid to do it, then okay, well, I guess you got to do that. But even then, you know, it's worth evaluating. Do I want to go through all these posts all day, or do I want to do something different? But like, as a volunteer, like don't put yourself through a bunch of undue suffering because like you just like feel like you're some kind of obligated to it or something. Just have that. Like, this is 99.9% of the problem of the time, a failure of confrontation. People don't want to make other people feel bad, so the entire community suffers because of that one failure to communicate. And I've seen that happen so often with broadcasters.
I know that as well. The trouble users that you're talking about, I know exactly what type of people that you mean. I've seen them. And I've also seen it kind of fester in a way, and they always scoot the line. They get close to the rules. They don't quite break them, but they do kind of pull things, and they say things that make you go, okay. Like, it's not technically against the rules, but it's not exactly, well, to use your words, Devin, it's not creating a good vibe, so to speak. Yeah, personally, I've also really always been about very vehemently just speaking against these people and kind of just going against it and not letting it get that bad. But I also think in general there should just be an atmosphere, and this can go from viewer to broadcaster, but also from moderator to broadcaster, and vice versa, obviously, of, you know, everything should be debatable, everything should be able to be spoken about. There shouldn't be a feeling of, okay, I'm going to tell the broadcaster this thing, it's going to be a confrontation. It should more be like, okay, hey, I know the broadcaster, he's a good friend of mine. I just want to say this one thing to him. And then, you know, you can get to a better place. You can use that, and you can actually have a constructive discussion that will actually get you somewhere and hopefully cause some improvement. Now, of course,
I think we're saying the same thing, but like, I think confrontation is super necessary. So I do think it is a confrontation, to be clear.
But I mean,
but it's a constructive one.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's kind of, I think that's more of a word thing. I just don't really see it as a confrontation anymore. If it's something that you can just air out and something that you can just say, you know, then it doesn't feel like a confrontation anymore, for me at least. And also,
yeah, I mean, I think either way, it needs to be addressed. Whether right, like I think the answer is like, hopefully no one's coming to blows or anything, but it is something that the longer, I mean, this is in sort of actually other psychological theory. Like it's almost not quite, I think, to this level, but it's a little bit of the missing stare stuff, right? Where you're just like, oh, like this person is bad, but like I think anytime you have to use the word like, well, they're technically not breaking the rules. Like I think you should take a strong, like a long, hard look at whether they are actually good for your community, right? Outside of whatever the rules are, right? It's like it's much more of a holistic, like, is this person or is this group of people a good representation of the community that I want, that I am fostering here, that I want to see in the future? And if the answer is no, they should not be part of the community. And it really doesn't matter, like, right, like obviously I think on some level, like you want to be reasonable and logical, but like I think there is definitely a part where a lot of people are like, well, I set these rules like 2 years ago and they haven't really broken the rules, so is it right to like remove them? And I think like like I think the answer is like, yeah, like you really do need to take an active hands-on role in shaping the community that you want. And if you're not going to do that, then the community will suffer for it.
Yeah,
right.
And
you need to take ownership.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the rules are also more like, it's not like everything has to be put in there. At the end of the day, it's like you say, are they creating a bad atmosphere or are they having negative effects on the community? Well, then indeed do something about it and maybe, take them out of the community.
Right. You need to take that ownership for sure.
Okay, so I do want to say that, like, I want to be very clear with how I confront people here, okay? Because I think that it's super important, all right? Like, I will actually go to someone and be like, listen, there's very clearly tension here or a problem here. I want to fix it. If we can't fix it, we're done. But how do we fix it? What do you think? And then I put the ball in their court, but it's that kind of energy. It's not like, hey, man, I was kind of, just wondering about like yesterday. It kind of seemed like a little bit. No, like I will come in, fires like guns blazing, like fire hot. Like my intent is to fix this. We may not fix it. If we don't, then we're taking next steps right away. We're gonna figure this out by the end of this conversation. What do you think? And then I put the ball in their court. But I like that level of confrontation, especially with moderators and with people that are longtime members or possibly supporters of your community. I've had people that have donated me thousands of dollars that I've banned. Because I could not actually sort through this with them, but I always had that conversation with them, and 99.9% of the time we're chill. It's good, and you'd be surprised. Even some of your most offensive people, that like, but like, dude, Talon, this guy, like, you, I can tell you intimately understand moderation, because when you have that feeling, like, oh, okay, that guy's gone. That's a person you should have banned years ago. It's the same in companies. Like, it's like people don't fire people for like enormous amounts of time. They just and they hate their job, and you hate having them there. And it's like, what are you guys doing? Like, you know what I mean? Yeah, 100%. So this is...
You kind of need to have that understanding that your rules are a guideline, and you need to practice discretion when you think that something is a little off. Like, you need to think about it. Like, does this break the rules? Maybe not, but have that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the way that I would put it is that really the rules are there to serve the community, not the other way around, right? And so it's like you're never enforcing rules for the sake of enforcing rules. You enforce rules because the rules are a reflection of what you want the future to be.
Absolutely.
I also think it's important to highlight there as well. The point you made about the user you said you banned that had donated, thousands of dollars. I think that's also a serious, issue that comes up sometimes, that moderators, in communities, they don't treat everyone the same way. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if someone might have donated thousands of dollars. If they are being, an actual negative influence in the community, then you're going to have to bite the bullet. And I'll admit it's going to be harder if it's a user that, that has contributed a lot, or that has, put in a lot of money, for example. That's then more focused on Twitch. But at the end of the day, you can give a streamer, for example, as much money as you like. It is not a free pass to be, an absolute terrible person to them, or to just be a negative influence altogether.
Yeah, so unfortunately we're going to have to wrap up this conversation here. So is there anything you guys wanted to add before I wrap up here?
Yeah, the takeaway, two most important things are don't over-moderate, I think, is number one. And especially since I assume that most of the demographic that's going to be receiving this show is going to be Twitch broadcasters and live broadcasters of some nature. So don't over moderate, but even in Discord servers and even in other places, like, make sure you get that right and go back to that part of the episode. And I think number two is establishing the culture, and especially initially, of like, what is your vision for this thing? What do you want this to be? How do you want this to look? And what is it in your sort of kind of perfect visualization of it? And then establishing that as guidelines, written even if needed, like writing that down and discussing it with all of your leadership and everyone that's going to represent the brand, and then moving forward and executing along a path that encourages that culture there and out. Like if you start with that, or even right now today, you're like, you know what, I'm going to take 30 minutes and I'm going to go into a Google Doc and I'm just going to write down some of the things that I hope my community is and what it looks like and what kind of chatters I want and that kind of thing. If you do nothing else but that, and then you started the thinking and you start that thought process, man, you're going to be so far ahead of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are the two takeaways.
Absolutely. RJ, you have anything?
Yeah, personally, I think just really to wrap it up a little bit as well, just don't underestimate how important it is to have that good moderation in your communities. And I think as well, something that I definitely want to have said, you know, at the end of the day, your moderators are also still members of your community. So I think it's very important that you kind of keep them, you know, make sure that they still fit in the, well, you know, in the general vibe, I think is a good way to put it, a bit like using Devin's words, but really to just, you know, and also for the moderators themselves, not so much from a broadcaster perspective, but also from a moderator's perspective, you know, if you don't feel at home, for example, anymore in a community, you know, do also have the guts to do something about it, for example, or make the decision for yourself to perhaps, you know, maybe consider moving out of it, or at least, yeah, approaching it well and trying to fix the problem. All in all, I think just an incredibly important aspect of any community, and it just adds a massive amount of value, and I think it's even essential. It has to be said.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you guys so much for being here. That's the end of our first episode of the Mod Pod.
Huge thanks, of course, to our guests for joining us for this inaugural episode. Right now, we are shooting for a new episode every 2 weeks. The next episode will be on how to get started in moderation. You can find us all over the internet at modcast.network, twitter.com/modcastpod, twitch.tv/modcast_podcast, and discord.gg/modpod. Good night and good luck. And that's it.
The Modcast podcast is staffed entirely by volunteers who are also content moderators across various social platforms. Our hosts are Sean Lee and Kairi. We're directed by Panley. This episode was produced by me, Mary Helene Hall, and another one of our producers is Angel. Joe Banks is our engineering lead, and our social lead is Dan Humphreys. Our social media managers are Delight and Drew, and Ahmed is our content writer. Thanks for listening.